Public history is perhaps the most underrated area of history. It is an important segment of historical studies, but it stands outside of the traditional bounds of academic historical scholarship. Public history is the historical analysis and stories presented in the real world. Public historians interact directly with the public, sharing information, locations, and regional analysis. The importance of family history as a local heritage provides people with a strong foundation and sets the tone for personal aspirations and respect for historical information. By learning about family history and tying that knowledge into local histories, a greater understanding of the wide-scale context of events, people, and regions come alive. Public history establishes a strong respect for local heritage and encourages the protection of historical landmarks, information, documentation, and continued growth of historical studies and local knowledge. I began my genealogical research years ago, building my family tree and sharing information with relatives doing the same work. However, when working simply on a family tree, the context and reality of the lives of ancestors are blurred. What I really wanted to know was more about my paternal grandparents, and through meticulous research and family conversations, I have been fortunate to find a bit of their life story that I would like to share with you. Henry and Kathleen Roberts are my paternal grandparents, and an important part of the greatest generation. They grew up through the Great Depression amongst hardship and want to thrive in the years of World War II before fate finally brought them together. Henry Bascom Roberts was born on February the 19th, 1924 in Lawrence County, Kentucky, in a community known simply as Dry Ridge.
All I know is that they had a doctor.
Come to the house?
Come to the house, yeah. He didn't have a midwife, he had a doctor.
Why?
Mom had a midwife. I don't know, granddad always got a doctor for him for birth. They lost a lot of kids, so that's probably the reason.
They were cautious.
Well, they had lost some right before him and then right after him.
And we think that, I always thought it was a midwife, but we think that at that time, a dad named Dad Henry Bascom Roberts. But when he got ready to receive his Social Security, and I don't know how they found out, but his name was
Leon Bascom.
Leon Bascom.
And that's what it was on his birth certificate, Leon Bascom.
Oh, really?
So they thought maybe they just talked about it, and they told the doctor the first thing, Henry Bascom, because that was after his grandfather. But then maybe they decided that wasn't good on their own, and they just changed it or something before.
Granddad Roberts talked him into changing it.
Oh, is that
That's
what
what
it
Dad
was?
said, yeah. Sounds pretty ornery. He had his buddies, and they went to school, but
That's what I was thinking of.
they were ornery in school. They had an old teacher, and they used to throw snowballs at her.
Yeah, where it snowed, and they were all out there on the outside, and it was after school, and they kept throwing snowballs at her so she couldn't get out the door.
She told them they were going to go to hell. And then when they get in trouble in school, she'd send them outside to get a switch so she could whip them, and they'd take their knife out and cut a ring around it, so when she hit them, it would break. So
I remember that. Daddy only had an 8th grade education. But when I was taking geometry, when I was a sophomore in school, I could memorize anything, but I could not memorize those stupid theorems because they didn't make any sense to me. And I couldn't do the problems. And he worked at General Motors, second shift, and I'd leave him a note. And he would come home after work, about midnight, and he would work out my problem sensibly, not geometry-wise, but he would work it out common sense. And how I ever passed geometry, I don't know, because I don't know how I worked it out. But he was smart. He knew what he was doing.
Henry was one of 5 sons of Wilson and Amba Roberts. The oldest was Orne, followed by John, Jack, Henry, Garland, and Noah. They were close brothers, always called each other by nicknames. Henry was Trig. They worked out in the fields with their father, farming and clearing the land. But by the time the war started, Henry was living in Springfield, Ohio, where his father had found work.
So Dad had to go. Dad lived in Springfield at the time. He got drafted, and they had to go down to Cincinnati, I think, for the draft board. And his mom did not think he would have to go. Jack had just went in, and they had just lowered the draft, down to 18. It was 21, so I think Dad was 20 at the time. So Grandma didn't think Dad would have to go because Dad always had a hernia on below his belt, like Granddad did, and it popped out a lot, and she just figured he'd be 4F because of it. So Dad went down there and they passed him through, and Dad was so excited when he got home. He told him, "I passed," and Grandma just about killed her, I think, because she didn't think, Jack had just went, and she didn't think Dad would have to go. But so he was drafted, and Dad said when he got drafted, they told him 2 big lines. You want to go in the Navy, you go in this line. You want to go in the Army, you go in this line. So he went in the Army line. Yeah, after Dad got out of boot camp, and he was placed in MPs, and so that's where he was going to be. But my granddad, his dad, got pneumonia real bad, and they still lived in Springfield, so they thought he was going to die. So Dad got a 15-day pass to go back, and so did Jack, and they both got back. And in time they got back, I think Granddad was getting better. So, but that was the last time he got to see his mom.
I never knew. I don't think I ever knew.
There's a lot of pictures of him in uniform, him and Jack in uniform. And John wasn't in yet, because John's not. At least he don't have his uniform on. John's just got street clothes at that time. They're in front of the hospital.
Yeah.
That's when it was.
That's when it was?
Yeah.
Oh, I never knew why they were in the front of the hospital.
Yeah, I didn't know that until, I don't know.
I hope I don't forget this stuff.
A long time before that. And then he got sent out to Seattle. So they sent his group out to Seattle.
Dad's group?
Yeah.
Really?
So he got to stay in Seattle. He said Seattle was beautiful. I mean, he loved Seattle. He said pretty parks. He got to eat seafood for the first time. I know, because I know he said he went to a restaurant and was eating clams, fried clams. He said he thought they were so good until he bit into one and looked into it, and then he couldn't eat anymore.
How long were they in Seattle?
I don't know. I don't think very long.
I never knew about that.
Yeah, after that, they put him on a boat, and they thought they were going out to one of the islands out in the Pacific. He said they didn't know where they were going. Maybe they were. I don't know. But because they didn't go, they went out. They didn't do the inland passage up through Canada. They went out because he said it was really rough. The boat was just tossing and turning, and they were sleeping like 5 high in hammocks. And so everybody's getting sick and thrown on. Dad said he didn't get sick at all. And but then they pulled in. They went to Juneau, Alaska. So as far as I know, when he was in Juneau, he's been trained for being an MP, and he got to go. They had a big gymnasium there, and the guy taught him how to box. And Dad had long arms. Dad liked boxing because he was good at it.
Like a monkey.
Yeah, so he enjoyed that. And then they got stationed. There was an air base by Yakutat, Alaska, and they were stationed there, and they were guarding the air base. And so, and he was there, And he went to different places, but he had Yakutat long ago, so he ended up in Anchorage for a while. He went to Nome for a while. He ended up last in Cold Bay, Alaska, which was it's a very tip for the Aleutian Star. There's a base there. And I think that was the last place he was.
Throughout his service in Alaska, Henry received regular mail from family and friends back home. His mother, Amba, especially, wrote to him on a regular basis, and Henry came to expect her letters in the mail. In June of 1945, while in Alaska, the letters from his mother stopped. Back home in Kentucky, Amba had fallen ill and subsequently passed away. Meanwhile, Henry began to get worried as no telegram or letters arrived, and he feared something was wrong. He wrote to his father in late June 1945 asking what was wrong, and finally he received word from home in the form of a letter from his cousin.
Well, I had a cousin, I guess, Aston, had a daughter, and her name was Louise, and she had either gone to Grandma's showing or her funeral, and she and Dad were like pen pals. She always wrote to Dad while he was in the military, and she was writing him about going to this service for his mom, and Dad had never been told that his mother had died. And we don't understand why Granddad didn't get hold of Red Cross or anybody that could have.
Jack should have. Jack was back by then. Jack should have known. He could have got in contact when Dad could have come home.
That's how I found out, and I don't really know how he handled it. Do you?
He was worried because Grandma would write him every week. So, and he said he hadn't got a letter from her for 2 or 3 weeks. So he was worried something was wrong. And then he got the letter from his cousin.
But he never got to go home or anything, did he?
I think he said he knew he could have gone home, but I think he was kind of ticked off Granddad for not, and so he just didn't want to go home after that for right then.
Yeah, I don't always just so sad, that they had to find out that way.
Dad was real close to his mom.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Dad said that when some of the other guys were out in the fields helping Granddad with the planting and stuff like that when Dad would come home, he would go in and he'd help Grandma too do things at the house, and they were real close.
As World War II ended and peace finally began, men in uniform began receiving their discharges from the military and finally returning home. Henry finally received his discharge on December 23, 1945. He quickly headed back to Seattle, Washington, and took a train from Seattle eastward to Kentucky, arriving at Louisa train station on Christmas Day. He then hitchhiked his way up to Dry Ridge. He came all the way up the hill to the old home place carrying his duffel bag, knocked on the door, and no one was home. But in the distance he could hear talking down the valley towards his grandparents, Henry Bascom and Laverna's place, where his dad and younger brothers Garley and Noah had gone to celebrate Christmas. So Henry threw his duffel bag under the porch and went down to finally see his family. Henry stayed at home for a while, then headed up to Springfield to see the rest of the family, who had stayed to work in Springfield. Little did he know, but he was about to meet his future wife, Kathleen.
He went over to see Earl, his uncle, and he had 2 little boys, and Mom was over there, and he thought Mom was a little tiny thing, like Alyssa, about 90 pounds or so. And he thought she was a little girl playing with Don and Dean, so he didn't pay any attention to her.
Really?
Yeah.
I wish I knew all this stuff. How?
And then, I don't know, I guess Ween fixed them up because Ween and Milt were dating.
Yeah, I think
So
it was Wayne that did
Ween
it.
fixed them up with Mom. And Mom didn't want to go out with them for some reason. So she went to the movies and watched the movie and ate a bunch of candy and got sick and come home, and then Dad showed up for the date, and so they went out on a date.
After their first date, Henry and Kathleen quickly fell in love and began dating steady. They were married just a few months later in May of 1946. The rest of their 58-year marriage, 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and many trials and blessings along the way will be continued in the next episode. Thank you for watching.